Welcome back to The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Last time we went through the Shadow Temple, beat the boss, and I showed off something that I don't see many other people show off, so if you want to see it, I'll just tell you. I used the ice arrows on the boss, not very effectively. It actually wasn't as great as I'm making it seem to be. As with all the sages, this isn't really surprising. In fact, Sheik told us who the sage was when we were getting the Nocturne of Shadow. It's Impa, so of course, it's Impa, that's it. Impa as a character is actually a reoccurring person, like, she's been reincarnated, I suppose, along with Zelda and Link, among many games of the Zelda series, and she's usually a helper of Zelda, like her handmaid or something like that, her nanny. There are games when she's depicted like this, kind of a ninja warrior, part of the Sheikah and such. Then there's some games when she's really old. And then there's the Oracle games, which make her really fat. And, like, when I was playing the Oracle games originally, I played them on a Game Boy Advance, which didn't have, like, the same properties as with a Game Boy Color. For example, there are L and R buttons on a Game Boy Advance, which actually widen or thin out the screen, depending on how you want to play it, I guess. And usually I played it while the screen was wide, and that made the Impa sprite really, really big, and kind of frightening considering what was happening in Oracle of Ages. But enough about that. Impa actually says that she knows that Zelda is safe, which is nice if you haven't played a Zelda game before. And I swear, for like a split second, you could see the mirror shield, and it didn't have any of those, like, the symbols on it, like the Ganondorf symbol or anything like that. It was just a mirror. We finally have the last medallion, and full hearts. I am very giddy about that. I don't know. It's just whenever I see a full 2 rows of hearts in a Zelda game, I just... It calms me, you know? And we have a little bit of extra cutscene this time. Rauru tells us that there's someone that we have to meet at the Temple of Time, and unlike with Kakariko and having to enter through only the Hyrule Field entrance, when it comes to the Temple of Time, we can actually just warp there and it'll act as if we entered from the actual entrance. If you haven't played Ocarina of Time, or Smash Bros. Melee, or Brawl, I guess not 4, it might be safe from you if you played 4. And also if you haven't played Hyrule Warriors, just prepare yourself, because you're going to learn one of the most well-known twists of video gaming history in this cutscene. But first, we're gonna see Sheik here, and a lot of exposition, which kinda sucks. But I have to talk through it because I am the commentator. These are the things that I have to do to entertain people. Something a bit interesting. I think this cutscene occurs, like, only if you have the Spirit and Shadow medallions. Obviously, the Shadow medallion means that you've gotten the previous 3, because that's the only way the cutscene will occur in Kakariko that gives you the Nocturne of Shadow. Like, you need to have the Forest, Fire, and Water medallions. And then the Spirit Temple, because it's, I guess, one of the later temples, and it requires items from other temples in order to beat. So they assume that you've, beat the other temples with that one as well. So it only checks for those 2. If you somehow got to, getting those 2 medallions before getting the other 3, this cutscene will probably still occur, I think. I'm not sure how the checks in coding work for this. All of the Triforce cutscenes have been a bit different. The one we got when talking to the Deku Tree at first was talking about the creation of the world. The one that we got when we were talking to Zelda was about how after the Golden Goddesses left this realm, they left the Triforce behind, and whoever would obtain it would get ultimate power. And In this one, Sheik is telling us about how the Triforce is split into 3 pieces if the person who touches it has an impure heart. And obviously Ganon was the one who touched it, and he's an evil dude, which means impure, I guess. And that means that the Triforce split into 3 pieces, and 2 other pieces will be hidden in people that were chosen basically by the goddesses. And one of those people is standing right in front of us. It's Link. Link is the one who has the Triforce of Courage. Ganondorf is the one who has the Triforce of Power, which gives him a slew of magical abilities and such. The Triforce of Courage doesn't really do anything. It's more like a name tag, I guess, or a title. It doesn't grant any powers, at least I don't think it does. Though Link having the Triforce of Courage kind of represents the player a bit more. Like, I can't see Link in this state, as in with the powers and weapons and tools and such that he currently has, having another piece of the Triforce. Like, if he had the Triforce of Wisdom, which we're about to see, the bottom left one, which doesn't make sense because Link is left-handed, so he should get the bottom left one. Instead he has the bottom right one. The Triforce of Power is on top. Anyway, Sheik Zelda. Back to the topic that I was going on before. That was the big twist, in case you didn't know. Link has the Triforce of Courage, and I think that represents the player more because in this current state, with how quote-unquote weak he is, it makes more sense. Like, it's the fact that Link's courageous and that he can stand up to the situations that he's put in that makes him strong. It's not really that he has a special ability that the Triforce of Wisdom or the Triforce of Courage, Power, would give, you know? It's still required to have all 3 in order to have the power that the Triforce gives you when it's fully completed, so it's still a necessary piece. Something interesting about this cutscene here is that it renders Child Link as he currently is, like, from the last point that you put in the Master Sword. Like, I'm pretty sure when we did the cutscene of Zelda and Sheik running away and Ganondorf coming up to us and us seeing him face to face for the first time, we had the Deku shield out. In the one that we just saw, we had the Hylian shield out. Also, that it does that in the 3D version, and it's a bit more noticeable there because the items you probably have during that cutscene in the 3D version, considering which dungeon you might do last, you might have the Lens of Truth on, and obviously you can't get that before drawing the Master Sword, which means it's easier to tell in the 3D version that the Link that you'll become when you put down the Master Sword again is the Link that was in that cutscene, not the Link that picked up the Master Sword for the first time. That's just, you know, talking about programming and stuff. Zelda has finally come out and told us that she was Sheik, and Sheik is still a he, I think. Like, Ruto calls Sheik a he when you save her. She says something like, "Thank Sheik." Well, I'm putting in Sheik here, but it says, "Thank him for me," or something like that. It's a pretty cool disguise. I was baffled when I first played the game, and I know a certain someone from a certain comedy game-playing duo was baffled when they first noticed, or saw, even though the other person didn't really do a good job of hiding it. But we get the light arrows from Zelda. Basically an item used to kill Ganon, you know, anti-Ganon arrow. I say Ganon, I mean Ganondorf. Not spoilery at all. And I'm not even going to use the light arrows on Ganon anyway, so that doesn't matter. They also have a special property, unlike the fire arrows, which do pretty much the same thing as normal arrows. These light arrows will make it so that when you kill an enemy with them, they drop a ton of rupees. I think usually for a small enemy they'll drop like 50s instead of just the regular 1s and 5s. It does cost a bit more magic though than the regular elemental arrows, by which I mean the fire and ice arrows. Those cost a very small amount and pretty much the same amount of magic. The light arrows cost a bit more, but it's still less than any of the spells, I think. Well, maybe it's just about as much as Furor's Wind. I don't know because I don't use the spells. Now that Zelda has exposed herself, Ganon is finally able to capture her. You know, he did good for 7 years. Also, that cutscene where she gets, well, that part of the cutscene rather, where she gets encased in that jewel thing, and Link kind of bashes the glass, so to speak. I think in the 3DS version the screen shakes a bit, which is a nice touch if they actually did add that. Maybe I'm just adding it to make it seem more awesome in my head, because I like that little touch. And we're finally going to be going to where Ganon's castle is. It's where Hyrule Castle was before the whole time skip. Now it's just called Ganon's Castle. And also there's a giant lava pit underneath it. So if you do come here at this point, there's really no way to get into the castle itself. Did I say at this point? I meant before this point. Before you get all of the sage's medallions. And there's some extra stuff that we can do here, which means that I'm going to be going inside the dungeon, grabbing an item after, you know, making a bit of progress, and then going back out of the dungeon. Since we have saved the sages though, they're going to use their power to create a bridge for us. A multicolored rainbow bridge that honestly looks a lot, like, it looks so much better in the 3D version. Like, this looks like actual crap. Well, not actual, but it looks bad in this version. At least I think so. In the 3DS version, it's all ornamental and like fancy looking, and this is just, it's N64-y. I guess that's the only way to describe it. I had a bit of a voice crack there. Now we're finally inside Ganon's castle. And this place doesn't have a map, so you can't use Furor's Wind here, but there's no reason to. There's this big central tower thing that's being surrounded by a magical barrier, and the only way to dispel that barrier is by going to all of these trial areas, each one associated with a different element, quote unquote, that you have, basically meaning each of the medallions. And the first one you want to go to is the shadow one, because this has an item that is very, very useful. In fact, it's required in order to get to the other areas, like to beat them. Well, maybe one other area it's required to beat. But it's also useful for getting a side quest thing that I'm going to be getting. Since this is the Shadow Temple trial, there's going to be a lot of tricks, you could call them. And this is the worst one. There's a like here, and it's kind of at the edge of this platform. At least it's very close to the edge. And you can hookshot to it. By doing so, you stun it, so you want to get out the way. But if you try to attack it head on, and probably fail because your sword clanks on it, you'll get eaten by it. It'll take your tunic and maybe your shield if you're still using the Hylian shield, and it will shoot you off of the edge, and you will lose your tunic. If you're wearing the Goron tunic, well, I fell. But if you're wearing the Goron tunic and it eats you, you're gonna fall and lose that tunic. And you'll have to buy another one, because the Goron tunic is actually required in order to get through this area. As is this item that we're going to be getting right now. And I think I said it was for one area. No, it's actually, you need it to get into 2 areas. It's the Golden Gauntlets. It's a more powerful version of the Silver Gauntlets. You can lift heavier things, and I guess push heavier things, but they don't really use it for pushing, just for lifting. I did a lot of this part of the dungeon, this trial. Well, I'll just call it trial. Well, blank trial. This shadow trial. I did a lot of it by hookshotting from a lot of things to a lot of things. I think the way you're supposed to do it is actually doing like switch puzzles and creating platforms that you can actually use to get across. but I did it my way, and my way was fast, so, well, except for that one part where I fell. Now that you've reached the room where the barrier is, basically, you shoot a light arrow at the giant acorn thing, and it explodes. Afterwards, you'll see which sage is associated with it. Jeez, that's a tongue twister. And the barrier will be dispelled a little bit. You need to do all 6 in order to actually dispel the central barrier. Once you did, blow up the thing, though, you'll get sent back to the beginning, which is very nice. I also really like the way the golden gauntlets look, because I'm wearing the hover boots all the time, and they kinda match. I mean, the hover boots aren't exactly gold, but it's close enough, alright? And also, it has a red jewel on it. I'm wearing a red tunic and a red shield that has silver on it. So, whatever. It looks good. Just like with the Shadow Temple, we finish a trial, and we're going to be leaving in order to get a side item. And this item is actually a lot more useful than the ice arrows ever were. I mean, they do extra damage, but this item, it's not really an item. This upgrade that we're getting is very, very nice, considering that enemies in Ganon's Tower can actually do a lot of damage to you. Especially the final boss, you can do like 4 hearts of damage. And I didn't show this off before, but with the silver gauntlets, you can lift these silver rocks. And it's, you could get past things that have silver rocks in front of them. With the golden gauntlets, you can lift these giant black hexagonal prism kind of blocks, and thus open the way to certain things. In this instance, we're opening the way to a fairy fountain. I think it's supposed to be in the same position that the previous fairy fountain was, like the one when we were in the past and we got the Din's Fire. Interesting, because that one was one of the red wall ones, which means it was a magic spell, and this one is a blue wall one, which means we're going to be getting an upgrade to Link. The reason I say it's interesting is because in the past it was a spell, and in the future it was a thing, the upgrade. Yes, that's the word. This fairy is the Great Fairy of Courage. There was also a Great Fairy of Power and a Great Fairy of Wisdom. The one of Power gives you the spin attack, so basically you get your magic meter. And then the one of Wisdom was the one we got previously, which gave us the double magic meter. This one gives us a little white outline around our hearts, basically meaning we take half as much damage. So we kind of have 20 hearts. I mean, not 20, 40. Whoops. So yeah, we can bum rush things even more now. There's also a Great Fairy of Magic, and I'm not sure if it's just one Great Fairy of Magic, and or there's 3 that have the same name, but that's basically the one that gives you all the magical spells. I don't think there are any gold sculptures in Ganon's castle, but there's one right here, and I am developing as a character and not collecting it. Finally, that's the last one that I'm ever going to see, and I decided not to collect it. I'm improving. When it comes to talking, I'm not. Back actually inside Ganon's castle, since we have the golden gauntlets, we can pretty much do all the trials in whatever order we so desire. And the first one that I'm going to be going to is the Spirit Trial. It's supposed to be like the Spirit Temple, and I guess it kind of is, but it has, it more so reminds me of the training ground, the Garuda training ground. Maybe that's not so true. I guess it's more of a mix between the child version and the adult version, because as an adult, I don't think we had the silver rupee collecting thing. We just had to do some, regular old puzzles. While as a child, we had the rupee collecting thing. And something that I'm going to show off here, watch how much damage I take from these blade things. Currently, I lost half a heart, but I got hit a ton of times by them, didn't I? I mean, I did collect 1 heart, but look at this. It doesn't do any visible damage on the first hit, but on the second hit, it does. The game counts fourths of hearts. Basically meaning, well, not fourths, eighths of hearts. Basically meaning that if you take an eighth of a heart of damage, it's not going to visibly show on the meter. But if you do take, you know, another eighth of a heart, it'll go down by a fourth. Again, harkening back to the child version of the dungeon, we need to use a bomb shoe to blow something up that we can't quite reach. Although this time we can't cheese it with a well-timed bomb. We actually have to use a bomb shoe. Hitting this switch will create a chest that has more bomb shoes in it in case you run out, or in case you didn't grab any. It's supposed to be reminiscent of the room where we hit a bomb to a boulder that was in the wall, and then it would explode, revealing light, and that would hit a light switch. Here's an actual light puzzle where we need to reflect the light at the sun switches, and if you hit the wrong switch, a wall master will appear. And since we have the Biggoron sword, it's not that big of a deal, but there's a lot of wrong switches. 4 of them are wrong, 3 of them are wrong of the 4. Only 1 of them is correct, and I have bad luck when it comes to these, so usually it's one of the last 2 that actually is the correct one. Even though I'm pretty sure it's not random at all, it's the correct one every time. I'm just kind of a dunce and I forget that sometimes. I also forget the positioning of it. The pots around are usually good about giving you magic or arrows, so I don't think there's a case where you're gonna reach one of these barrier holder thingies and not have enough magic or enough arrows to actually dispel them. If you don't, that sucks for 2 reasons. 1, you kinda did all that work for no reason, and 2, they don't give you a warp back to the beginning of the dungeon, or beginning of the trial rather, so that means you're gonna have to walk all the way back, and if it was like the shadow one, I think your best bet would have been to jump off the ledge and fall to like reset the room. And this trial right here, it actually covers up the medallion for it, which is pretty interesting considering that there wasn't a dungeon associated with this medallion. You need the golden gauntlets in order to access this room, obviously. And this is the light trial. It's weird considering that, you know, there was no light dungeon, and I would assume that it would have to do with something like the mirror shield. But instead, it has to do with the lens of truth, which is more the shadow dungeons territory, or shadow temple or trial. Kinda weird. I guess this one could be most closely associated with the, whatchamacallit, the Gerudo training ground? At least, I think so. And there's, like, a key in every room that you have to use to get to the next room, except for probably the last one. Here we have to play Zelda's Lullaby. I think this is the last time we're actually gonna play it. Like, this is the last time I have to input the left up, right, left up, right. It's kind of sad. I mean, I can in the next game, but it won't actually play the song. It'll just make the notes and not play the rest. Kind of sad. Zelda's Lullaby also isn't from this game. I think it was in A Link to the Past. Every time you saved one of the maidens or whatever, it would play the song. This trial, well, this room of this trial, is why I say it's pretty reminiscent of the training ground, because there's this area with all these silver rupees, and you need to collect them within the time limit. Kind of reminiscent of one of the earlier rooms if you took the counterclockwise route that I did. Excuse me. And I think, yeah, the same thing kind of happens here. Well, actually, that's not true. That didn't happen. The timer still goes even after collecting all of them, so you have to go fast to the door. And there was a trick room there. It appeared that the medallion, not the medallion, the barrier thing wasn't there, but in actuality it was just past it, and you'd need to use the lens of truth, or just know, in order to go forward and get to the actual barrier thing. You could make the case that this trial was sort of the beta for what the light temple was gonna be, considering that it was scrapped and thus we didn't really have one. We just had the Temple of Time, which is where the prelude of light would take us rather than the actual light temple that doesn't exist. I mean, I think that's what they call like the sacred realm. It's situated in the Temple of Light. I think that's how they put it, or something like that. This fire trial, you need the Goron tunic in order to survive here. It's too hot, and thus you have the timer going off. But considering how many hearts we have, the timer wouldn't be that big of a deal, honestly. I'm just showing here that if you stand on this platform, like that big central platform, or if you wear any tunic other than the Goron tunic, things will happen. Basically, the central platform will fall if you're not wearing the hover boots, because the hover boots float just above the ground, and the timer will go off if you're not wearing the Goron tunic. You need to lift this rock because there's two silver rupees that you can't get without having thrown that rock. There's one underneath it and one that you use as a platform to get to a different one. This one kind of sucks. Not this one specifically, the one that you used the big thing that you just threw to get to it. Because, well, I've said before that the hover boots make it so that you don't make very much vertical movement. Instead, you're just staying the same horizontally. So what you want to do is you want to take off the hover boots for a split second and make this jump, and then you can put them back on. If you fall here, you'll reset the room, so that means all of the silver rupees that you collected are gone, and you have to collect them all over again. Thank goodness I did not fall in the lava there, because falling in the lava is essentially having a room reset. There's no pit in this room, it's just the lava. And not the good kind that you can walk on for a little while. In order to get out of this room, you need to use the long shot in order to get all the way across there. But if you do get to there without like needing to, by which I mean you didn't get all the silver rupees, there's another hookshot target on the platform where that slug was, next to the one that we just threw, so you can get back pretty easily. That trial was a bit weird because it was hot, of course, but it made use of the hover boots, maybe not on purpose, and the silver rupees, both of which weren't really featured in the fire temple, so maybe they had more puzzles planned for it, but due to time constraints, I cannot talk today. Due to time constraints, they couldn't add it in or something like that. Maybe I'm just looking too hard into this. Maybe it's just that's the way they wanted it. This also kind of goes back to something I may have talked about before, where a previous idea for The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, or basically the Nintendo 64 Zelda, was that there was going to be a sort of Mario 64 kind of thing, where the whole thing takes place in Ganon's Tower, and you have a bunch of paintings that you jump into, and that's how you get to the dungeons and such. Kind of similar. There's a bunch of trials that you have to go into, and each one is associated with a dungeon. And also they reused the painting thing when it came to Phantom Ganon, the boss fight of the Forest Temple. This room, again, going back to like beta concepts, when the Water Temple was previously going to be the Ice Temple, and they just took all the ice assets that they made and put them in the Ice Cavern instead. The Water Trial is more based off of the Ice Cavern than the Water Temple. And also, as I said before, the water medallion looks like a snowflake. So, water was originally supposed to be ice. You need to use blue fire in this trial, and you also have some block pushing stuff, similar to the block pushing that we had to do in the Ice Cavern for the final room. What you want to do is you want to push the farther block into the hole, so you can push the closer one into a sort of groove in the wall, and thus you'd be able to climb on top of it and then get to some red ice that's up there. You need to bring blue fire from the previous room into this one. There's no blue fire here. And since I had 3 bottles of it, I can talk about something that I may or may not have talked about before, but I'm going to talk about it now. There's a beggar in Kakariko at this point. As a child, that person, I don't know if they're a guy or a girl, I honestly can't tell the gender, or sex, or whatever you want to call it. They were in Castletown near the Bomb Chew bowling alley, I think. And that person would buy stuff that's in your bottles. If you came to them with like milk or a fairy or something like that, they'd probably say that they'll give it to you for 20 rupees. But if you come up to them with blue fire, there'll be the whole fanfare thing, like the da-na-na-na, and you'll get it for, well, they'll take it for 200 rupees. It's, I guess, a good way to make money, but again, money's not required. And there's one way to make money that I forgot to talk about, and I'm not going to show off, but it's really good. When it comes to, you know, getting a lot of money in a short amount of time, the fastest way to do it, I feel, is going to the Lost Woods and fighting one of the Skull Kids with the Bigoron sword. Usually it'll take a few hits, and you don't want to use stabs, I don't think. You want to use either vertical slices or horizontal slices, because if you use a stab, or if you use a sort of ranged weapon like the hookshot or the bow, they'll backflip out of existence. Literally, like they won't be there anymore and kind of disappear. You need to exit and re-enter the room, not specifically the Lost Woods, but that sort of square of it, in order to get them to come back. If you're able to kill them with the Bigoron sword, you'll be able to get 200 rupees from them. They'll drop 200. And it's a really fast way to do it, because the Bigoron sword only takes a few hits for them to die, and it's also a very fast weapon. They can't really dodge it due to its range. So it's the most effective way to grind rupees, in my opinion. Again, though, don't really need to grind rupees in this game. I'm using Din's Fire for an offensive purpose here, finally. You can light all these torches, but there's one more torch that you need to light at the top of this doorway, and once you've lit it, you'll actually open the door. That chest has nothing to do with anything. This is the forest trial, and I've said this before, again. This one was wind previously. The medallion kind of looks like spinning fan blades, and there's gonna be a lot of wind puzzly stuff, which was in the Shadow Temple, but they moved it to the forest trial because I guess they made the trials before they finalized the game or something. And thus we get a wind-ish trial. You have to collect a bunch of silver rupees while being carried around by the wind. Using a combination of the iron boots and hover boots is probably the most effective thing to do here. The hover boots to let the wind carry you, and the iron boots to stop the wind from pushing you. Like with other rooms that involve collecting silver rupees, if you fall into the pit below, which is pretty easy to do if you're not paying attention to the fans or what boots you're wearing, then it's gonna reset. Hitting this switch here will allow a sort of hookshot target to come up, one of the ones that's on a pillar, so you can hookshot to it and grab one of the silver rupees. And this is also probably the easiest place to get to the exit of the room from, so once you get the last rupee, you'll probably want to come to here and then exit the room, because the way the fans are blowing, it's gonna make it difficult to actually exit properly. I believe if you do fall down after collecting all of them, you're gonna reset the rupees, so I'm just gonna play it safe here and wear the iron boots as this fan is spinning, and then hookshot to the pillar that we just made and that I just talked about. And as I said, that's the easiest and fastest way. Even while the fans are spinning, and even if you're wearing the iron boots, you can still hookshot to your destination, no problem. Because for some reason when you're hookshotting, you're invincible or something like that. But now we have reached the last barrier holder, And of course, it was from, well, it's the one associated with our first waifu Saria. So it's fitting. I did it on purpose. I actually didn't do it on purpose. I just went counterclockwise, and this ended up being the last one to do. With the last sage saved, wait, no, that's the wrong word. With this sage done, I guess I could say, we'll be able to go after the leader of the sages, as she puts it, Zelda herself. With this part of the barrier finally dispelled, the central bit will finally disappear, and we can actually enter Ganon's tower proper. Luckily, I'm so close to the tower, thanks to this being a circular or octagonal room. But next time on The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, we're going to be entering the tower for the final stretch of the game.